Okay, so hello everyone. I just wanted to talk to you a bit today about my trip to Saskatchewan. So I had quite a quite an experience out there. So what's really come to light is carbon taxes and how they impact multifamily owners. So I wanted to just take a few minutes to talk about that. So people that already own multifamily buildings, I mean, this is no secret. You've known about this for a long time. Um, Carbon taxes have been around for a while, and it's really been in the news a lot lately. More to do with home heating, so more to do with what's been happening in the Maritimes and Saskatchewan in particular. Basically, they're going to stop paying it, collecting it as of January 1st. So I've put together a short presentation here for you. I wanted to talk about, just how it impacts us as apartment owners. And also, if you're thinking of buying a multifamily building, what are the opportunities? How can you use the carbon taxes maybe, in your negotiation? And how do we mitigate that? How do we write that into our investment strategy? Because unlike single family, where, in general, the tenants pay for all the utility costs, on a multi, it's an all-inclusive rent, which means the landlord typically is paying for the heat and the water. Sub-metering for water is becoming more common, but not so much for heat yet. So we're going to dive into this a little bit. So I'm just going to start the presentation here. Bear with me here. I had a bit of a glitch. Okay, here we go. So carbon tax and multifamily apartment buildings. So I thought this was really interesting. I'm putting together my year end. So this is one of the things I'm talking about because this is going to impact multifamily owners, like all real estate investors, but more on in terms of multifamily, as I said, with these all-inclusive rents and heating. So I think you're going to see some drastic changes to investment in this, as particular in this year, and as the politics around the carbon tax starts to heat up. So there's a suggestion that as soon as if the conservatives win, they're going to get rid of it. But as investors, we have to plan for it being here, and we have to basically write our investment strategies around this. And then if it gets removed, so be it. But it is a way we need to manage our expenses accordingly. So I like this quote. So this was Jack Layton, and what I like about Jack Layton is he was vehemently opposed to carbon taxes. So he was the former, NDP leader, as you know, and he's famous for quoting. He said, those advocating a carbon tax suggest that by making the cost of things more expensive, people will make different choices. But Canada is a cold place, and heating your home really isn't a choice, Mr. Layton said. We shouldn't punish people, and that's what a carbon tax does. So that's exactly right. And, in this case, it's really punishing our tenants who are, in large part, they're kind of the mid to lower income. So it's directly hurting, the people it's supposed to be helping. So in response to what was happening in the Maritimes, they did a kind of a carve out. They gave them a break out in the Maritimes. Scott Moe decided he's going to do the same for the citizens of Saskatchewan. So at the end of October, he announced that Sask Energy, which is a crown corporation in Saskatchewan, so they do have the ability to do this, and they're just simply going to stop collecting the carbon tax. And it looks like there's going to be a slew of court challenges around this. I think there's a Saskatchewan election next year, so it's unsure whether Scott Moe will even be in power. But typically what I found about these fights is that the federal government typically wins in the end. But on this one, we'll see, because there's just so much pushback against these carbon taxes, and the momentum is really starting to grow. So in the meantime, at least for the first 6 months of 2024, on my Saskatchewan apartment buildings, I shouldn't have to pay carbon tax, but we'll see how it all plays out. Now, there's pros and cons to this, but I think of the carbon tax as a regressive tax. And by regressive, I mean that it affects everyone proportion to their income. So it hurts the people with lower income much more than the people with higher income. So it's like a sales tax. And I know the government is giving rebates, for based on your income bracket back. I mean, I live in British Columbia. It's a different system here. I don't think I've ever collected a rebate, but I know on the prairies in Ontario, you get rebates. You're supposed to get back more than what you pay in, etc. But I think that's kind of a fallacy. I think, in the long in the long run, I think you're going to end up paying more. And I think the consensus seems to be now that it is making life more expensive for everyone, and it's driving inflation as well. So, why is the sales tax regressive? So this is a good example. So it just shows, there's two ladies here. There's Mary and Julie. Mary makes $300, Julie makes $1,500. So they're paying the same sales tax of $6, but it's a much larger slice of Mary's income, at 2%. So it's like the single mom, right? Going to fill her tank, or having to pay for natural gas. It's hurting the people with lower income actually proportionally worse than the wealthy. Because really the wealthy are the ones that can afford the heat pumps, the Teslas, etc., right? So they can opt into these um, you know, heating options and energy options that aren't subject to the carbon tax. So it's really not, the government is trying to just basically use one magic bullet to solve all the problems. And I could go on all day about this, but the scope of this talk is limited to apartment building owners. If you're going to buy an apartment, and how is this impacting us? So the tax rate right now, as of December of 2023, we're paying $65 a ton. What does that mean in layman's terms? I'm going to go into that. But this chart is important because we can see kind of where we were. I remember when it was 50, and now, you can see by 2030, it's going to go to 170. And, the people in the Maritimes went absolutely bananas when this being applied to home heating oil, which is essentially kerosene. So we're only at the very beginning of where this is going to go. So I don't know. I don't know how it's all going to pan out. But anyway, 2030, it's going to go up to $170 a ton. What does that mean? So this comes straight from the Government of Canada website, natural gas, the fuel charge rates. So this is strictly natural gas. Now, this chart is cubic meter. So, I mean, this year it was 12 cents a cubic meter. It's going up to 32 cents a cubic meter. So you can see it's like almost tripling. You hear Pierre Poilievre saying quadruple the carbon tax, and there's some truth to that. So you can see this chart. The Canada Taxpayers Federation's already said that this was even last year. It's going to add $300 extra on home heating for the average furnace across Canada. So this is at only the low rates. So this is scheduled to get incrementally more expensive as we roll on. And for gasoline, it's very much the same thing. You can see right now we're, 14 cents a liter. By 2030, that is going to be more than doubled, which essentially I have a 60-liter tank. So that's basically, almost $23 in just carbon tax by 2030. Over and on top of all the other fuel taxes and surcharges that are already applied to gasoline. So some big changes here, and there's strong consensus that this is driving inflation even worse. So on apartment buildings, most apartments, they operate on a hydronic boiler system. So what this means is there's a central heating unit in the building somewhere. You can see me standing beside this one. This is in Saskatchewan. Most of the time, they're natural gas fired, could be oil fired, could even be biomass, could even be wood pellets, diesel. There's a variety of different fuels that can be applied to this. So basically, you have the heating unit that's supplied by the fuel of whatever you're using, and it's just basically a water circulation system. It pipes hot water through a heat emitter, which is your radiator, and goes back to the boiler system. Very simple system. I've seen these systems in Europe before. I used to live in Central Asia with very similar systems, except they have one central hot water system in the whole city. One giant coal-fired plant that supplies hot water to everything. So individual buildings, they don't have individual boilers. But in North America, this is a very simplistic diagram of what we're looking at. And why this is relevant is when we start talking about the gas consumption. So here's my bill. This was one in 2022. So this is when the carbon tax on the gas was 9 cents a cubic meter. It's now gone up to 12 in 2023. But you can see even this. So this was my January bill. It's over $600. My total bill was $2,140. This represented about 30% of the bill. Ouch, right? So this is one of the reasons why our utilities have really shot up. So now fast forward, if I own this building to 2030, If I use the same fuel consumption for that same month, 6138 cubes, the carbon tax is now going to go from 630 to $2,090. So that means my bill is going to go up to rocket up to $3,600, which is going to be about 60% of my bill. So yeah, that is really going to pinch. We're really going to feel that. And our options are somewhat limited. Now, that insult to injury, if you, in some provinces like Saskatchewan and Alberta that, rely on coal-fired power, natural gas, etc., a carbon tax is also applied to your hydro, also to your power. So as you can see in Saskatchewan, I'm also paying a carbon charge on my electricity. So it's not just gas. So it's kind of showing up everywhere as a really strong, I guess, disincentive or incentive, however you look at it, to go to cleaner energy sources. So the bottom line, as apartment building owners, what is this going to cost us? There's two different ways it's going to cost us. It's going to cost us immediately in our cash flow, and it's also going to cost us in terms of our building valuation. So here's a case study. So this is actual fuel usage for a year. I rounded the numbers up. So 2024, I'm scheduled to pay, and keep in mind, they're also GST on carbon tax. Is carbon tax a good or a service? I'm not exactly sure which it is. I don't understand why that applies, but I mean, what I think is irrelevant. $6,000, 2024. Now, if Scott Moe is successful and the carbon tax is relieved for Saskatchewan, investors and anyone who has home heating, that's going to disappear. So that's a big impact. But you can see over the next few years, that is going to go up significantly to 2030 when it's 32 cents a cube, which will translate to over $12,000 in increased costs in just carbon tax and tax on the carbon tax in the year 2030. So that is significant impact on this investment that we need to take a closer look at. So I've talked in many videos before, income property in general, IPP, income producing property, especially for commercial, is dependent on the income. So for every dollar of income, the value goes up about $200 on a 5 to a 5.5% capitalization rate. So this does work in reverse. So if you have to drop your rents or your expenses go up, your net income gets smaller. And this is essentially what is happening. We've seen massive increases in property taxes, insurance especially. The insurance from the forest fires hasn't even hit yet. That's likely coming in 2024. And these carbon taxes. This has taken a bigger and bigger bite, out of investors' pockets. So if I just do some calculation here, that cost in 2024 kind of translates to $100,000 in building value, right? I mean, if I could add that much, that's how much the building is worth extra. So you can see by 2030, that's, $225,000 hit to the value of your building if you did nothing, right? So the quickest way to counter this is obviously do a rent increase. But now, as you can see, the amount of rent increase that you have to give to compensate for the tax goes directly onto the tenants, right? So it's going to hurt them more than anybody else. And I've long argued that this is a regressive tax, and this is a prime example of this. It shouldn't be applied to home heating, and it certainly shouldn't be applied to multifamily buildings. Now, I know newer stuff, they're equipped with heat pumps, etc. But still, I mean, the tenant is still responsible for paying the electricity and energy in those units. So the argument that I kind of really ticks me off a little bit is, well, I mean, you're going to throw a carbon tax on there, but it's still cheaper than electric heat. Now, I live in a townhouse in Kelowna that has an electric furnace. And I can tell you, it is not fun. It costs about $400, $450 to heat this 3-bedroom townhouse in January. And it's a warm weather province in general. So electric heat is extremely expensive. And where do we expect hydro prices to go? They sure as hell aren't going to go down. So we can fully anticipate this to keep going up. But the argument is, well, the carbon tax is going to keep going up, but it's still going to be cheaper than electricity, which is true. But that's also true because electricity costs are going to keep going up. So that's the argument I have against heat pump systems. Now, My girlfriend has a heat pump. She has a brand new apartment she's renting in Kelowna. And you can't just replace a heat pump with a boiler system in an old walk-up. There's ducting involved. It's complicated, expensive. It's totally different systems. But her building was constructed with heat pumps. And I can tell you, these things are an absolute pig on electricity. If you're doing the heating, they run nonstop. They're very drafty. And sure, they're efficient in terms of they don't use greenhouse gases, but the electricity they use is way high for the size of the unit that she's in. Now, this isn't a debate about heat pumps. I'm just saying that, for the tenant, in this case, they're still better off in a system that has an older boiler without a carbon tax. But obviously, we're going to a lower carbon future, and I'm not fighting that. I'm just looking for solutions for my tenants mostly. So as owners, what real choices do we have here? What can we do as owners? I know oftentimes we sometimes feel powerless when it comes to expenses. Now, the good news is the pandemic-related inflation expenses are slowing down. Inflation numbers came out today. We're still pretty high, 3.1. But I think the supply chain stuff and the costs are going to start stabilizing as rents go up. But we do have a little bit of more rent upside to go, actually quite a bit more. I would say, $300, $400 in Alberta, because we're still so far behind. I know the larger cities, Toronto, Vancouver, they're starting to taper back on the rents a little bit, starting to plateau. But on the prairies, we still have a lot of upside to go. We're still way below where we should be. So what options do we have? Well, really, it comes down to you increase the rents, and fortunately on the prairies, we're able to do that. I know in a lot of provinces, Ontario and BC in particular, you can't, right? I mean, anything is a rent increase. If you try to submeter your utilities, even in Alberta, that counts as a rent increase. So just because you installed water meters, and then you're charging the water back, it still counts as a rent increase. So you can only do that once a year. So we do that for some of our buildings. Charging back water has now become common. And I think you're going to see a lot more of that. Some apartments that I've seen, they have all electric heat. Even in Saskatoon, I saw one, it was all baseboards. So some owners may start installing baseboards and putting it on the tenant's electrical panel. Now, that's obviously very expensive. It's going to involve, upgrade to wiring code, etc. But it could be an option that some owners look at least partially cover these costs of heating. And I kind of talked about the heat pump issue, and for right now, on older walk-ups, I don't really see that as a viable option. But also, the government's caught wind of this. They want to put in protections to make sure that us as landlords, we don't pass this off to our tenants. The government loves to take credit for supplying affordable housing, even though they're not the ones, trying to operate the business and make a living and generate a return for their investors. So tenant protection is already in the works in Ontario. So they're kind of hinting at this, and I think you're going to see this ramping up more. The idea would be to force or at least strongly encourage owners to minimize a building's carbon footprint and enhance energy conservation. Bottom line, multi-residential owners who have not already done so will have to implement better energy consumption systems and practices or face increased costs which cannot be passed on to tenants. Cannot be passed on to tenants. So it looks like there's going to be some legislation to prevent this. We'll have to see how this all plays out. But in the meantime, yeah, this is an issue that we have to deal with. Interestingly enough, around the world, heat in Germany, etc., it's standard. All utilities are charged back to the tenant. It's very much like a triple net commercial lease in Canada. So this could be an option. Now, it's going to be difficult to charge this back on walk-ups because, incredible competition. Like if I look at Edmonton, if one landlord opts into this, then, they're going to have significantly lower rent to get the tenant in there and onto this. But the end result is a tenant will pay, if they're paying $1,000 and you offered them 800, but they're going to pay 300 in utilities, they're probably going to go for that, thinking they're getting a better deal. And this way, the landlord and the tenant kind of, in the same ballpark. I know, like in Kelowna, right? all these purpose-built rentals, the tenant is paying for all utilities, everything. The landlord doesn't cover any of it. So this is something that we could be seeing in older walk-ups, which is now standard to new construction. So, as always, there's always opportunity. So if you own a building already, I've addressed that, but what if you're looking to buy? How do we incorporate this into our buying and into our underwriting? I did an underwriting webinar last month, and expenses was one of the things that I talked about. So what I'm starting to do now is I'm writing the carbon tax, including the $170 a ton, 32 cents a cubic meter, right on the pro forma as a separate line item. And I'm essentially highlighting that, along with insurance. Even though insurance right now is about 650 a unit per year, you should be underwriting at 1,000 in anticipation that it's going up. Okay. So expenses right now for a standard walk-up, probably close to $7,000 a month. A lot of these pro formas are pretty light on these expenses, but I think until inflation really gets under control, I think we want to be on the high side, at least for our underwriting purposes. Interest rates are starting to stabilize a little bit too. So it's going to take a while for that to work through its system. But in the meantime, we just want to be conservative with our numbers. So use a conservative cap rate for the area too. So, if it's Edmonton, a 5 might be aggressive. You might want to use 5.5, 5.75, even 6 if you're in a smaller area, surrounding area, just to be on the safe side. And, your insurance and utilities, utilities were, $1,200. Now they're probably $1,900 per unit per year. Maybe with carbon taxes, it's up to $2,200. You have to use your individual discretion on that, but you want to underwrite high on those numbers just to make sure. And finally, I just want to remind everybody about my Multifamily Investing Essentials program. So I launched this last month. It was an incredible success. I had a lot of people opt into this program. You can probably do this program in 2 weeks. It's, 4 modules. Each module is about 45 minutes, with some awesome downloads, some awesome bonus materials, some webinars. Really a great value program if you're just looking to get into multifamily investing. So I'm going to leave it at that for now. And because I'm not actually doing a live performance, I just wanted to, again, thank everyone for watching this video. This is probably going to be the last video that I'm going to be putting out in 2023. So I want to wish everybody a Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, happy investing. Please reach out to me, call, email, text. I love hearing from you, especially if you got deals on the go. I actually am putting in multiple offers. I just did another offer today. So I'm still bullish on the market. This little drop in interest rates and the bond has really opened up good buying opportunities. There's a tremendous amount of deals out there. And like I've said this many times, there's at least 2 years of rental upside to go. So, especially in the areas that I'm investing in. So ask me how to participate in one of my deals. I got a couple of really large ones coming up that you'll be able to participate in. And if you just, need some help or just want to say hi. So again, thank you for watching the video and, hopefully wish you guys a Merry Christmas.